So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the one here called Design Build 2. Now this one has, basically it's exactly the same as the first one, except now instead of 1 unit, we're building 2 units. Okay? The durations are exactly the same. The uncertainties are exactly the same. So would I expect to get exactly the same results? Let's see what happens. So again, I'm going to run the analysis. Now, again, I'm going to step through because I just want to see what's happening. Now, I've got, again, path 1, design and build unit 1. Path 2 is design and build unit 2. Let's see what happens. So in my first iteration, unit 1 went short, but unit 2 went long. Okay, on my second iteration, unit 2 went short, unit 1 went long. And I can just see that what happens is the critical path switches between my units, right? So sometimes it's unit number 1, sometimes it's unit number 2. And it flips around back and forth, back and forth. Now, the important thing about this is that when it does flip between this critical path and this critical path, the finish milestone still gets pushed out. So, I've got again, it's a fairly simple schedule here with 2 paths, but what's happening is, my milestone is being pushed by one or the other. So again, if I hit complete, it comes up and says, okay, now my probability of hitting the deterministic finish date is down to 3%. So when I had 1, it was at 18%. When I have 2, it's down to 3%. And this is what we call the parallel paths effect. So the parallel paths effect says if you've got multiple parallel paths in your schedule and more than one of them could go critical, you're going to end up with a very low probability of achieving your end date. Because what's happening is that poor finish milestone is getting pushed. If unit 1 is late, it gets pushed. If unit 2 is late, it gets pushed. It's no coincidence that if you take 18% and multiply it by 18%, you get 3%. So I think I've got a slide for that. Let me flip over to it here. Okay, so again, our likelihood of finishing the project on time is going to be impacted by the fact that we have these 2 parallel paths. And what happens is the likelihood of finishing unit number 1, in my example it said 18%, in this one it says 17%. It's insignificant difference. But if they both have to finish, if I have this parallel paths, I only have a 3% probability of achieving my end date. So we wonder why when we're dealing with large capital projects with many parallel paths that we don't finish the project on time. Well, it's because there's so many things that can go wrong. We could very well end up with any one of them pushing the end date of the project. Similarly, in turnaround world, we've got many vessels that we need to go in and we need to do work on. Any one of those vessels could be a problem. We could go in and find all the trays are on the floor and there's all kinds of damage and we have to do all kinds of welding. Any one of those could end up suddenly being the critical path. Okay, one more quick example here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look at one here where I've got one critical path, so this is basically the same schedule again, except that in this example we've got 30 days to design unit 1, 40 days to build it, 35 days to design unit 2, and 45 days to build unit 2. So when I look at my CPM schedule, I say, okay, the critical path goes through design and build unit number 2. But what I've got in here is I've got some differences in the uncertainties around these activities. Although design and build unit number 2 is the critical path, it has less uncertainty on it. Now that's not that uncommon, because what happens is, as project people, we're so good at managing the critical path that often it no longer becomes the critical path. So, it's like the whack-a-mole game at the Stampede grounds. And if you've ever played that, the mole pops up and you hit it with a mallet, and it goes down, another one pops up and you hit it with a mallet. And we do that with critical paths. We do such a good job of whacking down the critical path that another critical path pops up. And that just keeps happening. And then we're surprised that we have all these new critical paths every time we do a schedule update. So this can help us identify where our likely critical path is going to be. So again, I'm going to run the analysis. I'm going to just step through a couple times to show you what it looks like. So unit number 2 goes critical, then unit 1 goes critical. Unit 1 goes critical, then Unit 2 goes critical. And as I just keep stepping through, I see that the critical path changes from one to the other. Eventually, when I hit complete, again, I've got my likelihood of completing the project on time. That's all great, but I'm not interested in looking at the distribution now. I want to look at what's really driving my project. And the way I do that is I go to my tornado plot. When I click on the tornado, again, there's not very many activities here, so it's not a lot of activities in the tornado. But what the system tells me is the thing that's really driving the schedule is designing and building unit number 1. Now remember, designing and building unit number 2 was the critical path in my CPM schedule, but because of the uncertainties, unit number 1 is in fact where I need to put my efforts. I need to reduce the uncertainties in unit number 1 in order to finish my project on time. So this is how the tool can be very useful to identify those near critical paths that are likely to come up and cause a problem for the project team as the project proceeds.